In the dim multi-story car park beneath the shopping center, CEO Victoria Harrington froze in sheer horror as a stranger suddenly scooped up her little girl Isla and dashed toward the shadows like some brazen abductor. She screamed. Her heart dropped straight through her chest. But seconds later, Victoria stood paralyzed when she realized the man was Callum Thompson, a skint single dad, not attacking at all, but risking everything to shove Isla out of the path of a runaway delivery lorry, barreling straight toward them. Victoria Harrington had built an empire on absolute control. At 34, with sleek ash-blonde hair falling in soft waves, and a tailored sharpness that silenced every boardroom she walked into, she was the very picture of success. As CEO of Harrington Life Sciences, pioneers in medical tech and rock-solid patient data security, she turned her family's modest pharma firm into a billion-pound powerhouse. Her colleagues nicknamed her the Ice Queen, not out of spite, but pure respect for the fortress she kept around her feelings. But beneath that frozen shell lived a woman who'd learned far too young that letting your guard down was dangerous. Brought up in a wealthy home, where affection was a transaction, and love always came with conditions, Victoria had decided early on that real protection meant keeping distance. Her divorce 3 years earlier had only hardened that belief. Her ex's betrayal had been so cold, so calculated. She'd sworn never to trust anyone again. The only warmth she let herself feel was saved for one person, her daughter Isla. Even that bond carried scars. She worked late, missed ballet recitals, sent nannies to school pickups. The guilt gnawed at her in the small hours when she lay awake wondering if Isla would remember a mum who was present, or one who was always just out of reach. Isla Harrington, at 6 years old, was everything her mother wasn't. Where Victoria was guarded, Isla was wide open. Where Victoria calculated, Isla trusted with huge blue eyes that seemed to hold entire seas of emotion, and a shy smile that only appeared when she felt truly safe. The little girl moved through the world, clutching a well-loved stuffed bunny called Clover. Isla was terrified of the dark, especially multi-story car parks, where shadows swallowed the light, and strange echoes made her grip Mummy's hand tighter. But more than anything, she was afraid of losing the one person who mattered most. Callum Thompson knew exactly what loss felt like. At 36, he was tall, broad-shouldered, with the quiet strength that comes from weathering storms that would have broken most men. Once he'd been a technical rescue specialist, leading high-risk ops into collapsed buildings, flood zones, disaster sites, where every second separated life from death. He had an uncanny gift for reading danger instantly, sensing trouble before anyone else clocked it. His mates called him a human radar. He could hear the groan of failing steel, or the shift of unstable ground, long before disaster hit. But all that training, all that instinct, hadn't been enough to save the person who mattered most. 3 years ago, his wife Sarah died during a rescue job. When the emergency medical support failed to turn up on time, the response service, contracted through a subsidiary of a massive biotech group, had a critical delay because of a glitch in their dispatch system. By the time help reached Sarah, it was too late. Callum held her hand as she slipped away, and something inside him shattered forever. He left the service the day after her funeral. Couldn't bear the uniform anymore. Couldn't stand the pitying looks. Couldn't face saving strangers while his own wife lay in the ground. Now he took whatever jobs he could. Cleaning offices, fixing machinery, anything honest that paid the bills. And let him be there for his boy. The money was tight, but it kept his hands busy, and his mind from drifting too far back. Most importantly, it meant he could be home when his son needed him. Noah Thompson, at 8 years old, had grown up faster than any kid should. Bright, perceptive, with a maturity in his dark eyes that spoke of a boy who'd learned grief before long division. Noah rarely complained. He saw how his dad's shoulders sagged when the bills stacked up, how his smile never quite reached his eyes. So Noah became the reason Callum kept going. Good grades, helping round the house, cracking daft jokes at tea time, to try and pull a real laugh from his dad. And late at night, when he thought no one could hear, Noah whispered promises to his mum's photo that he'd look after dad no matter what. The night everything changed started ordinarily enough. Victoria had just endured a brutal emergency board meeting that dragged on 3 hours over schedule. Exhausted and snappy, she collected Isla from the company nursery and drove to the shopping center for the weekly shop. Isla, tired and grumpy, begged to bring Clover. Victoria said yes. A tiny surrender to stop the whining. Callum was finishing his shift in the same center. Final job, deep clean of the underground levels. Faded work gloves. Old jacket with the logo peeling off. Face etched with the fatigue of a man just trying to get through another day. Almost done. One more level to check. Then home to Noah. Neither Victoria nor Callum had any clue that in under 10 minutes, their lives would smash together in a moment of pure terror and misunderstanding. That would change everything. Isla dropped Clover near the back of Victoria's car, without thinking. The little girl darted behind the vehicle to fetch her precious bunny. Victoria was locking the driver's door, phone to her ear as her assistant rattled off tomorrow's diary. She didn't see Isla slip away. 3 levels above, a delivery lorry sat on a steep ramp. Its handbrake had been tampered with, bolts loosened on purpose by someone who wanted chaos. The lorry began to roll, slowly at first, almost lazily, then gathering speed as gravity took over. The sound was faint, a whisper of tires on concrete, but to trained ears, it was a scream. Callum heard it instantly, head snapped up, body tensed. Every instinct from his rescue days fired at once. He scanned the level, calculated trajectory, speed, impact point. And then he saw her. A tiny girl in a pink coat, crouched behind a black saloon, completely oblivious to the 2-ton monster hurtling toward her. He didn't think. He just ran. Boots pounding concrete, closing the gap in seconds. He reached Isla. Just as she stood up, Clover clutched in tiny hands. Callum didn't slow. He scooped her into his arms and sprinted for the nearest pillar, diving behind it as the lorry roared past and smashed into a parked van with a deafening crunch of metal. Victoria heard the crash, heard her daughter scream. She spun round, saw a man holding Isla, curled protectively around her, vanishing into shadow. Her brain didn't register rescue. It registered kidnap. Vision narrowed. Breath stopped. She screamed Isla's name and ran, heels clattering frantically, voice raw with terror she'd never known. Security guards came running. Victoria shouting, pointing, gasping half-formed words. Kidnapper, stranger. My daughter. Someone grabbed her arm to steady her. Torches sliced the dark. And then she saw him. Callum crouched low, still cradling Isla, who was crying softly against his chest. His jacket torn, face pale. To Victoria, he looked like a man who'd snatched her child. She lunged forward, ripped Isla from his arms, shoved him hard, voice cracking. What the hell do you think you're doing? Guards grabbed him, yanked him up, barking questions. Callum didn't fight. He just looked at Victoria, with an expression that wasn't anger. It was something far worse. Deep, bone-tired hurt. One guard dashed off to check CCTV. The other kept Callum held. Victoria clutched Isla, whispering comforts into her hair. But Isla wasn't comforted. She kept glancing back at Callum. Little face confused and tear-streaked. Kept mumbling something. Victoria. Too shaken, couldn't hear. The guard returned, face ashen. Asked Victoria to come look at the screen. She handed Isla to another officer. And followed, legs unsteady. Grainy black and white footage. She watched the lorry roll. Watched Isla crouch behind the car. Watched Callum sprint across frame. And snatch her daughter. Out of death's path. Just before impact. Undeniable. He'd saved her. Victoria's hands started shaking. Color drained from her face. She turned slowly. And looked at Callum. Now standing quietly. Wrists still held. His face hadn't changed. Tired. Sad. Not waiting for apology. Just a man who'd done what needed doing. And expected nothing back. Isla wriggled free. And ran to Callum. Wrapped small arms round his leg. Looked up with tear-filled eyes. Said it clearly this time. Loud enough for everyone. "Mummy, he saved me. He's a good man." Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. She walked over slowly. Voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry. I thought you were hurting her. I didn't see. I didn't know. Thank you. Thank you for saving my daughter." Callum nodded once. Not acceptance. Just acknowledgement. He gently untangled Isla's arms. And stepped back. Told the guards he needed to get home to his lad. They let him go. He walked toward the exit. Without looking back. Victoria watched him leave. And for the first time in years, she felt small. Foolish. An ache of gratitude so fierce. It nearly dropped her to her knees. But the danger wasn't finished. As guards examined the wreckage, one crouched by the lorry and shouted. "Handbrakes been tampered with. Bolts loosened on purpose. This wasn't an accident." Victoria's blood turned to ice. She looked down at Isla. Still clutching Clover. Oblivious. Someone had tried to harm them. And they might try again. The head of security insisted on reviewing all footage from the past week. Victoria agreed at once. But her mind was racing. Business rivals, sacked employees, corporate espionage. The list of people who might want to hurt her was worryingly long. But targeting her child? That crossed a line she'd never imagined anyone would. She asked for Callum's contact details. He was a contract cleaner for the building firm. They had his mobile on file. Victoria memorized the number. She didn't know why. But something told her she'd need it. That night Victoria couldn't sleep. She sat in Isla's room. Watching her daughter breathe softly under the duvet. Clover tucked under one small arm. She replayed the moment over and over. The crash, Callum cradling Isla. The look in his eyes when she'd shoved him. Shame made her feel sick. But beneath the shame was curiosity. Who was this man? Why had he reacted so fast? She remembered how he moved. The precision, the instinctive protectiveness. That wasn't the behavior of a cleaner. That was someone trained for emergencies. Victoria pulled out her phone. And did something she rarely did. She searched his name. Callum Thompson. Sparse results. But what she found made her sit up straighter. Former technical rescue specialist. Decorated service record. Left the field 3 years ago under personal circumstances. One old news photo. Callum in uniform, standing with his team after a successful shout. He looked younger. He looked happy. Victoria stared at the photo for ages. Then she looked at her sleeping daughter. She thought about the man who'd saved Isla's life. And received only suspicion in return. She made a decision. Tomorrow she would find him. She would apologize properly. She would make sure he knew his actions hadn't gone unnoticed. Meanwhile, across the city, Callum sat in his small flat. Noah asleep in the next room. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the night. He'd done the right thing. He knew that. But the look on that woman's face, the fear, the accusation, had cut deeper than he wanted to admit. It reminded him of every time he'd failed. Every person he hadn't been quick enough to save. Every time his skills hadn't been enough. He thought about Sarah. How she would have kissed his forehead. And told him he was a hero, even if no one else saw it. But Sarah was gone. Callum was just a man trying to survive. He closed his eyes. And tried to sleep, unaware that the woman whose daughter he'd saved was about to walk back into his life. In ways neither could predict. The next evening the multi-story car park lost power. Victoria had returned to the center to fetch documents left in her car. Isla was with her again. Despite Victoria's better judgment, the little girl had been anxious all day, refusing to be separated from Mummy. So Victoria had relented, holding Isla's hand tightly, as they descended into the garage. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, long shadows turning familiar shapes into monsters. Isla whimpered. Victoria pulled out her phone, using the torch to navigate. They were almost at the car, when Isla gasped and pointed. Clover had fallen again, rolling toward a dark corner near the stairwell. Isla pulled free and ran after the bunny. Before Victoria could stop her, Victoria called out, voice sharp with fear. But Isla had vanished into shadow. Victoria ran after her, heart hammering, phone beam slicing the dark like a knife. She heard a sound, a shuffle, a low voice. Her world narrowed to that sound. She sprinted forward, rounded the corner, and saw a figure in a dark hoodie, gripping Isla's wrist, trying to drag her toward the stairwell exit. Isla was fighting, kicking, voice shrill with terror. Victoria screamed and lunged, but another figure stepped from the shadows, blocking her path. Then heavy footsteps behind her. A familiar voice, low and steady, told her to get down. Victoria dropped instinctively. Callum Thompson ran past her, moving with the speed and precision of a soldier. He reached the man holding Isla in 3 strides, wrenched the child free with one arm, and delivered a sharp strike to the man's side with the other. The attacker stumbled back, swearing, and fled up the stairwell. The second figure hesitated, then ran too. Callum set Isla down gently, and checked her over. Hands careful, voice calm. Are you hurt, love? Isla shook her head, tears streaming, and threw her arms round his neck. Victoria scrambled up, and ran to them, pulling both Isla and Callum into a desperate embrace. Before she even realized what she was doing, she was shaking. Couldn't stop shaking. Callum gently extracted himself, and told her they needed to leave immediately. He escorted them to Victoria's car, checked the back seat and boot, waited until they were safely inside, before stepping back. Victoria rolled down the window. How did you know to be here? Callum hesitated, then admitted he'd been worried. The tampered lorry, the deliberate sabotage. He'd had a bad feeling. So he'd come back to check. Just in case. Victoria stared at him. This man who owed her nothing, and had saved her daughter twice. She asked if he would meet her tomorrow. Somewhere public, somewhere safe. She needed to understand what was happening. And she had a feeling he was the only one who could help. Callum didn't answer right away. He looked at Isla, watching him through the window with wide, trusting eyes. Then he looked at Victoria, and something in his expression softened. Yes. Tomorrow. Coffee shop on the high street. Noon. Victoria nodded. Thanked him again. Voice breaking. He walked away, disappearing into the garage shadows, leaving Victoria with the overwhelming realization that she had just invited a stranger into her life. A stranger who had twice saved the person she loved most. The coffee shop was busy at noon. Hum of conversation, hiss of espresso machines. Victoria arrived early, Isla in tow. Despite her initial plan to leave the girl with a childminder, Isla had refused. She wanted to see the man who saved her. Victoria couldn't say no. Callum arrived exactly on time. He looked different in daylight. Less intimidating, more human. Simple jacket and jeans. Face still marked by fatigue. But less guarded. Isla lit up when she saw him. And ran over, clutching a drawing she'd made. 3 stick figures. 1 tall, 1 medium, 1 small. She pointed to the tall one. That's him. The hero. Callum crouched to her level. Expression softening in a way Victoria hadn't seen before. He told Isla she was very brave. Told her Clover was lucky to have her. He accepted the drawing with a quiet thank you. That sounded like it meant far more than the words. They sat down. Victoria wasted no time. She told Callum everything. Business rivals, recent hostile takeover attempt. Threats she'd received over the past few months. She admitted she'd ignored them, thinking they were empty bluster. Now she wasn't so sure. Callum listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back and asked one question. Did she have any enemies with a personal vendetta? Not just business competitors. Someone who hated her specifically. Victoria thought for a moment. Then shook her head. She couldn't think of anyone. Callum frowned. He told her the sabotage felt personal. The lorry could have killed anyone. But the second attempt, in the dark. That was targeted. Someone wanted Isla. And if they wanted Isla, they wanted to hurt Victoria. In the deepest way possible. Victoria felt cold. She asked if he thought it would happen again. Callum didn't sugarcoat it. Yes. Whoever this is, they're not done. They're escalating. Next time they might succeed. Victoria made a decision. She asked Callum if he'd consider helping her. Not as an employee. As a partner. Someone who could keep Isla safe. While she figured out who was behind this. She offered to pay him well. Callum shook his head. But he looked at Isla. Quietly coloring at the table. And sighed. He said he'd do it. Not for the money. For the little girl who reminded him too much of his own son. Over the next few days, Victoria and Callum worked together to piece together the puzzle. Victoria reviewed company dealings. Callum quietly checked security footage. And followed up leads. It was during one late-night session in Victoria's office that the truth began to emerge. Callum noticed something in an old file Victoria had pulled. A subsidiary of Harrington Life Sciences had contracted emergency response services 3 years ago. There'd been a major incident. A delay in dispatch that resulted in a fatality. During a rescue operation. The victim's name was listed. Sarah Thompson. Callum went very still. Victoria noticed immediately. Asked what was wrong. He didn't answer. Just stared at the document. Hands gripping the desk edge so tightly his knuckles turned white. Victoria looked at the name. Then at him. Realization dawned slowly, horribly. She whispered his surname. Thompson. Callum stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. He told her he needed to leave. Victoria stood too, voice shaking. She told him she didn't know. She hadn't been directly involved. The subsidiary operated independently. But she knew that didn't matter. Her name was on the company. Her family's legacy had built the empire. And somewhere in that empire, someone had made a mistake that cost him everything. Callum looked at her. And for the first time she saw the full weight of his grief. He told her he didn't blame her. He never had. But knowing this, being here helping her, it was harder than he'd thought it would be. Victoria asked if he wanted her to find someone else. He shook his head. He'd made a promise to keep Isla safe. He wouldn't break it. But he needed space. He needed time. Victoria nodded. Tears streaming down her face. She told him she was sorry. Told him she'd do everything in her power to make it right. Even though she knew she never could. Callum left without another word. That night Victoria couldn't stop crying. She held Isla close. And thought about the man who'd saved her daughter. Despite carrying a pain that Victoria's own company had caused. She thought about the injustice of it. The cruelty of fate. The unbearable weight of guilt. But she didn't have time to wallow. The next morning Isla was gone. Victoria woke to find her daughter's bed empty. Window open. Screen cut. A single note on the pillow. Block letters. If you want her back, come alone. The address was an abandoned warehouse. On the outskirts of the city. Victoria called Callum immediately. Voice breaking. He answered on the first ring. She told him everything. He told her not to go alone. She told him she had no choice. He said yes, she did. She had him. 30 minutes later Callum arrived at Victoria's house with a plan. He'd go in first. Locate Isla, create a distraction. Victoria would follow at a distance. Phone on, ready to call the police. The moment Isla was safe. It was risky. It was dangerous. But it was the best option they had. They drove in silence. When they reached the warehouse, Callum told Victoria to wait 5 minutes before following. He checked his phone. Sent a quick text to his neighbor asking her to watch Noah if he didn't return. And stepped out of the car. Victoria watched him disappear into the building. She counted the seconds. When 5 minutes passed, she followed. Inside was a maze of rusted machinery and broken crates. Victoria moved carefully. Heart hammering. She heard voices ahead. She crept closer and saw them. Isla was tied to a chair, crying softly. Standing over her was a man Victoria recognized instantly. Corbin Elam. A business rival who'd tried and failed to take over Harrington Life Sciences 2 years earlier. Corbin wasn't alone. He had 3 other men with him. All armed. Victoria's blood turned to ice. This wasn't just business. This was revenge. Corbin began to speak. Voice dripping with venom. He told Isla her mother was a thief who'd stolen his future. Told her Victoria deserved to suffer. Then he turned to the shadows and called out. He knew she was there. He knew she'd come. And he knew she'd brought help. Callum stepped out of the darkness. Hands raised. Corbin laughed. He told Victoria this was perfect. The man whose wife died because of her company. Now playing hero for her daughter. The irony was delicious. Corbin revealed he'd orchestrated Sarah's death. Not directly. But he'd bribed the dispatch manager to delay the response. He'd been targeting Harrington Life Sciences even then. Trying to create scandals to drive down share prices. Sarah had been collateral damage. Callum lunged. The fight that followed was brutal and chaotic. Callum took down 2 of the men quickly, but Corbin pulled a knife. Victoria screamed. Callum dodged the first swipe, but not the second. The blade caught his shoulder. He staggered back. Isla was screaming, pulling against her restraints. Victoria ran forward, throwing herself between Corbin and Callum. Corbin raised the knife again, and then the warehouse doors burst open. Police flooded in. Weapons drawn, shouting commands. Corbin froze. His men dropped their weapons. Callum collapsed to his knees, blood soaking through his shirt. Victoria ran to him, pressing her hands against the wound. Screaming for help. Isla was freed. She ran to Callum and wrapped her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. Callum held her with his good arm, whispering that she was safe now. Everything was going to be okay. An ambulance arrived. Paramedics loaded Callum onto a stretcher. Victoria climbed in beside him, refusing to leave. Isla went with them, holding Callum's hand the entire ride to hospital. The surgery took 4 hours. Victoria sat in the waiting room, Isla asleep in her lap, and prayed for the first time in years. She prayed Callum would survive. Prayed she'd have the chance to tell him what he meant to them. When the doctor finally emerged, he told her Callum would recover. The wound was deep, but it had missed major arteries. He'd need physio, but he'd be fine. Victoria broke down, crying so hard she could barely breathe. She was allowed to see him an hour later. Callum was awake, groggy from the anesthetic, but alert enough to recognize her. Victoria sat beside his bed and took his hand. She told him she was sorry for everything. For the past, for dragging him into danger, for not seeing sooner how much he'd sacrificed. Callum squeezed her hand gently. He told her she had nothing to apologize for. He'd made a choice. He'd make it again. Because Isla deserved to be safe. And because somewhere along the way, he'd started to care about both of them. More than he wanted to admit. Victoria smiled through her tears. She told him she cared about him too. And that when he was ready, when he was healed, she wanted him in their lives. Not as a protector, not as a debt repaid, but as family. Callum closed his eyes. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than grief. He felt hope. Weeks passed. Callum recovered slowly. Days in physio, evenings with Noah. Victoria visited often, bringing Isla along. The little girl had become inseparable from Callum, calling him her hero, drawing him pictures, reading him stories. Noah and Isla became fast friends, their bond growing with each visit. Victoria and Callum grew closer too. They talked about their pasts, their fears, their dreams. Two people who'd lost so much, learning how to trust again. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Victoria brought Isla and Noah to the park. Callum met them there, arm still in a sling, but his smile genuine for the first time in years. Isla ran up to him and grabbed his hand. Then she grabbed Victoria's hand. She looked up at both of them and asked if they could all have tea together, like a family. Victoria looked at Callum. He looked back at her. Neither said anything, but the answer was clear in their eyes. They walked together through the park, golden light wrapping around them like a warm embrace. Noah and Isla ran ahead, laughing, voices bright with joy. Victoria reached over and took Callum's free hand. He didn't pull away. They didn't talk about the future. They didn't make promises they weren't ready to keep. But in that moment, walking side by side, they both knew the same truth. This wasn't chance. This wasn't coincidence. This was something deeper. Something worth fighting for. Something that felt an awful lot like coming home. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them was afraid.